All right, y'all. So we're looking at the spread of Protestantism today. This is the next lesson. We've just finished the German Reformation from 1517 to 1555, and we begin to see this area here. This is where the German Reformation occurred. It is going to move to the north area as we see that area for other reasons. But I also want to point out there's two other centers of Reformation. That's going to be the Calvinist Reformation, and then this is going to be the English Reformation. And those two are going to definitively be as important as the German Reformation. As we look at this map, I hope as you look at this map, you begin to see this idea that there's no more a united Europe. There's no Christendom the way we see it. Religiously and politically, the Christendom is collapsing into nation states. And it's a really important element that we're seeing that. I hope you see that. But let's go and move on. So why did Protestantism spread so rapidly in the 1520s? Well, first, I just want to make sure when we look over here, the Catholic leaders, they've never questioned their beliefs. They never thought, why am I Catholic? What makes Catholicism real? It just existed. So when the Protestant reformers, who were heavily into the intellectual side as well as religious, inspired by the Christian humanists such as Erasmus and maybe even Thomas More, they're going to go to the original manuscripts. They begin to realize what is true about Christianity. They've challenged these different components and they know exactly what they believe. So when disputations occurred throughout Europe, especially in the Swiss Reformation, disputations, these are debates, Protestants are going to easily be able to defeat their Catholic counterparts because the Catholics don't know why they believe in what they did. I love this image here. We see the Protestants over here clearly engaged, and over here, the outdated old Catholic reformers or Catholic leaders. They don't know what they believe in. They're lost. So if you went to a disputation, you're more likely to be leaving supporting the Protestant cause. Now, with this said, let's go ahead and jump into the Swiss Reformation. Zwingli is such an important individual. He was inspired by Luther's break from Rome, and Zwingli really led the Swiss Reformation. And that Swiss Reformation, it's going to have unique traits that makes it different than Luther. But Zwingli had this kind of romantic notion that the Lutherans and the Zwinglians could eventually unite their forces, and we're going to see that. For our class, we don't need to know everything about his beliefs. I do think, though, the presence of Jesus in the sacraments is really important. Because Zwingli, he rejected the idea that they became literal. He actually believed that if you think they're literal, you're a cannibal. So he's going to reject that. He's going to say the images, such as the Eucharist, are going to be symbolic. His religious teachings won't unite Switzerland, but actually polarize. And by 1529, we're on the verge of the bloodiest of the religious civil wars that we'll talk a little bit later. And that's going to lead us right to the Marburg Colloquy. This is an important moment, a meeting between Zwingli and Luther, who hope to unite the Protestant movements against Charles V. Remember, this is 1529. So if this is 1529, we're just 2 years out of the sack of Rome. Charles V clearly is a powerful Catholic dogmatic. He's looking to centralize, and really he will murder and genocide any of the groups that he sees as non-Catholic. So here we see, so the purpose of the Marburg Colloquy is to unite the movements. Unfortunately, despite agreeing upon 90%, really it's closer to 96% of the theological beliefs, the Eucharist proved to be the violent point of contention. Eucharist, it's what Christians call communion, and the Eucharist is where the Christian commits his sacrament to get closer to Christ or closer to God, and they partake of wine and bread. And this, there's some New Testament stuff here. You don't need to know that, but it's this belief that Jesus did it, so we should do it. And when it came down to it, Luther viewed the Eucharist as the true, literal flesh and blood of Christ as it entered the body. Zwingli viewed it as symbolic. Zwingli could never get over the idea that Luther believed it was the traditional, the literal flesh and blood. Zwingli believed that was too Catholic for him. And rather than unity, The Marburg Colloquy is going to prove that the Protestants define themselves by their differences. And this is a historical principle. So, this is a historical principle. It's really anytime we talk about a progressive side or a left side, sides that are really looking to create change, well, they're going to define themselves by their differences rather than similarities. So rather than unity, anybody who's being more progressive will most likely be divided within their movement. And this is really, and again, this is such a terrible moment because this might be historical fiction or historical myth, but I always like it because it seems like it's a hint of truth. And it was the idea that on October 4th, when they ended the meeting in disagreement, they agreed to share communion, a spiritual sacrament to get closer to Jesus. And the rumor was that at the moment Zwingli took in the bread and the wine, he chewed it up a little bit and spat it onto the feet of Luther. Luther now felt that he had the literal flesh and blood of Jesus on his body, and from what I understand, they had a fisticuffs. They actually fought a little bit over this. So again, it may be more mythical, but this is why when Dr. Spielvogel placed that quote in the Swiss Civil War of 1533, when I always say that Zwingli got sushied, he got executed, burnt, and then cut up and spread so they can't make it. So he's sliced apart. That's when Luther said he got what he deserved. I think that's a very important quote there, even if it's not true. But the reason it's important is because it really illustrates that the Protestants are defining themselves by their differences. So that's going to be the very much in a very quiet, very quickly, the whole idea that Zwingli, his Reformation comes to a complete end, and we're going to see how John Calvin eventually does that. But the most important part about the Marburg Colloquy is Protestants define themselves by their differences. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to pause here.